All right, we are live and welcome today to another live stream. If you don't know me, my name is Mark Shumsker. I am known on YouTube as Truepokerdealer. I have been teaching people to be poker dealers since 2011 on YouTube, and I have been in the industry since '07. I'm smiling because I got a little distracted for a second, but it's good to be here, and I've got something exciting for today, as it says in the title. So this is still a regular QA, and while there's downtime, I'm sort of going to go through something. So I've got this right here in my hands. So my aunt, as she was going through my her mom's place, my grandmother's place, my aunt found this book in a bookshelf. And my grandma, I'll say hi. Hey, Grandma Addie. She is 101 years old right now. Will be 102 in October. And this was at her place, and my aunt figured I should have it. The book is called Poker. Here, let me pull this up. So it's called Poker, the nation's most fascinating card game. And if you look inside of this book, you can see this is from 1950. Let me see if I can get that to focus. You can sort of see it there. Well, I've got this whole book, and I sort of, in the downtime today, I sort of want to go through this, have a little bit of fun with it. Because it's really interesting taking a snapshot. Look, I don't really like history that much, if I'm being honest. But, I mean, this is poker, and so it does draw my attention a little bit. And I thought it'd be interesting to sort of go through this. So we're going to do that today. Here's the back cover, just in case we care. And here we've got what's inside. Chad says hello. Hey, what's up, Chad? Good to see you. I did respond to your message, so hopefully you saw that. Appreciate the always trying to help and make things cool and better. So I'm sort of going to go through this. I haven't actually read through this. I thought it would be more fun to read through this book with you guys and just see what it was like for people thinking about poker back in 1950, which is when this came out. So you can actually see that right here. The page that I was holding up before, you can see copyrighted 1950, apparently in Ohio. So I'm just going to sort of browse through this. It says it explains all forms of poker. I'm not going to read every word, but there are going to be parts that catch my attention that I'm sure I'll share. It has mathematical tables, the complete official rules. This is not a dealing poker book back then, although it does sort of talk about that side of it for, I'm guessing, home games. I don't know if there's any talk of casinos in here at all. I really have no idea. So I'm sort of curious to see what this book says, but it does claim that this is the most interesting book, or the nation's most fascinating card game, which, you know, years later, I think we can say that they're right. Poker is probably the most well-known casino game, or it's definitely the most well-known casino game. But let's see. Chad says, I thought Amarillo Slim was the person who started poker. Well, I don't know that that's true, but Amarillo Slim definitely helped bring poker to Las Vegas, specifically Texas Hold'em, and I think he was the one. I read his book. I don't remember exactly, but I have a vague memory that he was the one that helped create the World Series of Poker, where there was a poker tournament played by everybody out there. But I don't know that I'm right about that. I think it's pretty unlikely that he was the one that actually created poker. I could be wrong about that. Maybe Texas Hold'em, but let's see. All right, so for any form of poker not listed below, consult the full glossary on page 41. This book isn't super long either. You know, you can see as I'm holding it up here, it's, you know, it's not super short, but it's pretty thin. You can see how thin this book is right here. As I said, feel free to do the regular QA. You guys can ask any questions about anything as I'm going through this. But this is from 1950 again. I probably should have said that earlier. Well, whatever. I mean, in the title is what I meant to say. Let's see. So why is poker so popular? How to learn poker. Equipment needed. Betting limits. General laws of poker. Ranks of hands. Irregularities. Let's see. It talks about different types of draw poker. Stud poker. High-low poker. Dealer choice games and the variations, whiskey poker, spit in the ocean. These are all things that I am very unfamiliar with. I've never heard of whiskey poker. I've never heard of spit in the ocean. I'm excited to figure out what spit in the ocean is. That sounds pretty interesting. Let's see. Poker ethics, strategy, mathematical tables. Okay. So why is poker so popular? Players, the master of their own fate. It can be serious or not serious. Ooh, quoting Eli Culbertson. I don't know who that is. Forward to the book, Fortune Poker. There's a lot of variety in poker, that I definitely agree with. And everyone likes to hold good cards, which we all know that feeling of holding good cards is amazing. Refined ladies whose grandmothers would have shuddered at the very thought of that rough, horrible game, playing poker, enjoying it, and learning to their pleasure that they don't have to gamble to have a good time. That's interesting. Chad says, what is your favorite kind of hold'em? Mine is just regular hold'em. The Omaha and high-low stuff is confusing to me, LOL. I appreciate that question. I think the question that you're asking when you say what is my favorite kind of hold'em, a lot of people get confused by this actually. Omaha is often considered a type of hold'em because you're holding the cards and there's community cards and those are all face up, and so flop games are often considered hold'em. I still sort of think of it that way, but I'm careful to use that language because a lot of people get confused when I talk about hold'em. They think just Texas hold'em because Texas hold'em is the name, whereas pot limit Omaha doesn't have hold'em in the title, so it gets confusing even though it is basically a version of hold'em. In terms of playing, I'm probably still just a fan of No Limit Texas hold'em. But it's because I don't really feel like I know what I'm doing as much as a player for Omaha and the high-low stuff. I feel like that could change one day, though. I definitely enjoy dealing those games. A lot of people as dealers are just like, But for me as a dealer, it's more engaging, and there's more for me to learn. As a dealer, I'm like observing what people are doing, what they're thinking about, and all that. So I definitely enjoy dealing those games a bit better. And then it's possible that I'm also conditioned by the players in general because in the pot limit Omaha games, there's just a higher chance of getting greater tips. So for me, that sort of engages me anyway. I mean, it is what it is. It's an honest answer. Let's see. So this is implying, by the way, that poker has been around a while, and as of 1950, and long enough for women to even start to jump in and get to like it. And we do have to remember that in 1950 it was a very different world in terms of gender equality and all that stuff. Let me see. Poker is a game of skill, second to none. They have public opinion polls. It says every American should understand poker. Nearly every American does understand poker or wants to. So this book is sort of trying to introduce it to people or give some more depth to it for everybody. It is really necessary to understand only two basic things: the values of poker hands, the principles of betting in poker. A player who understands these can play without difficulty in any type of poker game. You know, I understand where they're going with that. There's a lot of people that say poker takes a lifetime to master, but it doesn't take very long to learn how to play. And this is basically saying, like, let's get you from the point where you feel like you can't sit at a poker table and participate to the point where you can. And if you understand the values of poker hands and the principles of betting in poker, then you will have what you need in order to be able to sit at that table. That is absolutely true. And this is even true in casinos today. For anybody that doesn't know how to play poker, if you learn the values of poker hands, which it's commonly referred to as the poker rankings, or the rankings of poker hands nowadays, and the principles of betting and how a betting round works, you will be able to sit at that table. You might not be able to win, but you will be able to sit at the table. Object of the game: everybody plays for him or herself. Partnerships are strictly forbidden by the laws. They have a word laws here, which is interesting. As if it's written into regulated legislature. Pot is an accumulation of all bets made by the player, so it's a really basic explanation here. after the betting is over, the hands are shown, called the showdown, and the best poker hand wins the pot. So they had the terminology, the showdown, back then too, in 1950. Poker hand consists of 5 cards. The value of the hand depends on whether it contains one of the following combinations. Straight flush is the highest possible hand. We know that. 4 of a kind. Full house. Flush. We know all this stuff, of course. So they're explaining that because they just said that that's a really important part of it. And now in this book from 1950, I'm just going to keep saying that because people keep jumping in and out. How the betting works. In the course of each poker deal, there will be one or more betting intervals in which the players have an opportunity to bet on their hands before the cards are even dealt. The rules of poker game being played may require that each player put an additional contribution. Yes, that was a very hard word for me. Called an ante. Yep. They had the terminology for ante in 1950, 72 years ago. My dad is the one that originally taught me poker, which I'm assuming he learned from his parents. And I am assuming that my grandmother, whose book this is, she's 101 years old now, and this is her book. It was at her place, and it was given to me. And I appreciate that this was set aside by my aunt. Thank you. Let's see. Chips a call or may drop, which means that he puts the chips into the pot, discards his hand, and is out of the betting until there's another deal and receives a new hand. Let's see. So they use drop instead of fold. So the terminology of drop back then meant fold. It'd be funny nowadays to take your cards and say, I drop, meaning fold. That is sort of a card term. Like, I think of cards, I probably have heard the term drop, like drop out. The Video Gamer Consortium. Oh, this is work right here. Sorta. I'm sort of enjoying, like, I haven't read this book. It's only like 40 pages, so I was just gonna kind of go through it with you guys. Let's see. A betting interval ends when the bets have been equalized. Listen to the terminology. That is, when each player has put into the pot exactly as many chips as each other player or has dropped, which is folded in today's lingo. 2 or more betting intervals for each poker deal. They capitalized poker. I wonder if that's significant back then. The Video Gamer Consortium says pass, I've heard. Yeah, it's another term. So, but I feel like pass is still used today. I've never heard a player in a poker room say, I drop, toss their cards in. As recent as last week, a guy came into our local game and said pass instead of check or fold. Yep. Is that in here and I'm just not seeing it? Check. Yeah, no, I see check. Is a bet of nothing. Must at least call the bet or drop. They keep saying drop. It's really funny. I wonder when it changed to fold. I wonder if they use the term fold at all in here. In each betting interval, one player is designated as the first bettor according to the rules of the game. Also, we got to remember that the way this is being explained, books were the only thing to convey information back then. I know that there was black and white television in 1950. I don't think color had come out at that point. But, for the most part, you're not going to watch a TV show on how to play poker. So people are very used to this being the only way to understand it. So like nowadays, we're not patient enough to learn something using this type of a way of delivering information. But back then we absolutely were, because it was really the only option we had. So we had to learn to be patient, read, think it through, picture it in our head, all that stuff. And that's what this is meant to do. Let me see. J-Boss says, hey, cool. Hi, Truepokerdealer. Hey, what's up, J-Boss? The Video Gamer Consortium. I've heard drop for draw games, but in reference to swapping cards out. Interesting. I've heard of, I think of that as discard. Giorgio says, hi, Mark. I have a question. Well, you have no need to announce that. You may simply ask your question, and I shall do my thing. But hi, and how's it going? Let's see. Player to player to left. No one may check, bet, or even drop except when their turn comes. So they're clear about that, which is good. The 2 main types of poker. Curious what this says. So you learn these two first, it says, and then you can learn the other variants. Draw poker and stud poker. All right, so there were no flop games in this 1950s book, at least. So the person who wrote this did not consider flop games to exist. They didn't consider Hold'em to exist. Not at least significantly enough for them to say anything. I wonder I'm looking this up. What year was Hold'em first played? Origins of Texas Hold'em. Most agree the game was birthed in its namesake state, Texas, in the town of Robstown, sometime during the early 1900s. However, it went virtually unnoticed for decades until it was finally launched in 1967 in Las Vegas. So 1967 appears to commonly be the year that Texas Hold'em was popularized to the point where it was even recognized. And so it makes sense based on reading that a book like this that came out in 1950 would consider draw poker and stud poker to be the two actual versions of poker. Giorgio says, do you think poker is on the rise or is falling? That's a good question. So let's see. I think that poker has... I think that from 2002 until 2000, or maybe 2001 until about 2005 or 6, it was really on the rise. I think it plateaued a bit at that point where people were very used to this, like, lots of people are playing it vibe. And then I think it started to fall off when there was a lot of internet regulation, and it didn't fall off too much. It just sort of switched to casinos. I'm thinking about my answer as I sort of talk through the last 2 decades of it in my experience. And then I think once poker vlogging started, and with Brad Owen and a lot of these guys, I think poker started to rise. So I would probably say that poker is a bit on the rise right now, but COVID makes it a little bit tougher. It's the thing that's challenging with poker, looking 30, 40 years from now, is the existence of solvers now make it so that it changes the type of person that wants to get into poker if you really dive in and learn about it. Poker vlogging, though, man, is that a good thing for poker. But yeah, overall, I would say that the poker vlogging side of it has given it a rise. And I would say we're probably still experiencing some of that, maybe plateauing a bit. But I mean, look, I've been around poker for almost 30 years. When I was a kid, I started playing it at home with these types of games that are in this book. And what's the thing I want to say? Once I got into the casino industry after playing poker a lot, I definitely got used to it, right? So playing cash games aren't as fun as they used to be for me because I've been doing that in casinos for well over a decade at this point. But that being said, it's still pretty fun. I'm still familiar with it. But there is something that sort of sucks the fun out of poker when I start evaluating it in terms of plus or minus EV and all this stuff instead of, I can win a lot of money. Those days are sort of gone for me. But I think it takes a long time to get there. So as new people get into it, there's that rush. It takes years for them to really experience that. And I think poker vlogging has just popped so many more people into it. So yeah, I think we're in pretty good shape with poker still, honestly. But I don't know exactly. I haven't done any metrics or anything like that. I appreciate that question. Giorgio said, maybe when COVID was good for poker because lots of people started while on lockdown with online games. I mean, there's truth to that for sure. J-Boss says, I learned draw poker first as explained by that book. It's pretty cool. And I think I sort of did too. I'm saying sort of in terms of the book. Like my dad taught me draw poker when I was a kid. We would play for like pennies. They were all his pennies, of course. But that was really fun to like bet and do all that stuff as a kid and get that experience and learn it. Definitely enjoyed that. So this is explaining, by the way, this seems pretty similar to the rules of what we think of for draw poker and stud, which, they're not as common. And there's a lot of people that have spent years and years and years and years playing poker in casinos and have never actually experienced either of these games, which is an interesting thing to think about. I have. Draw poker is a fun game to play at home. It's like we've commercialized poker so much that we sort of forget about that fun little time of like getting 5 cards and getting to discard 3 of them, and seeing if you win, and limit betting rounds and all that stuff. Like, this sort of brings me back. And when I think about playing like that, I like it. It's just, you can't go to a casino and get that to happen, and you can go to casinos and play poker when you want to. So there's definitely this this vibe where I'd have to get a bunch of people together to choose to play draw poker at my house in order to get to play draw poker, which is much harder than just like getting in the car and driving to the casino to play 1-2 no limit Texas Hold'em nowadays. But it's definitely fun to play draw poker, and it's fun to play home games. Being in the industry, I've definitely gotten away from playing home games, and that's sort of a bummer, because it's fun being with a bunch of friends and just, playing poker. I've literally trained myself to think of everything in poker as a player in terms of expected value, which has its downsides. Let's see. Because it takes some of the fun out of it. There's a lot of variants. It says jackpots. Let's see. Draw poker in which no one may open the pot makes the first bet unless he has a pair of jacks or better. So they call that jackpots. Okay, so they're talking about the variants. And jackpots is what I think we call now jacks or better. So I think we just call it jacks or better because it's not confusing to do that. High-low poker. In the showdown, the highest poker hand and the lowest poker hand divide by the pot equally. But it doesn't say what they define as high-low. 7-card stud. They call it stud poker before, 7-card stud being the most popular variant for that. And that seems the same as what we do now. 5-card draw, 5-card stud. All right. How to become a good poker player. Interesting. The first step is to learn the values of the poker hands and study the principles of betting until you are sure you understand it thoroughly. I will fall over out of my chair if they talk about ranging players in this book. Let's see. Deal out hands face up. The hands of 6 or 7 players, and they would be dealt in a game. Let's see. So it's basically saying to get good at this, deal out hands to yourself and see what happens, to get familiar with how frequently that happens. Something that is beautiful about like Zynga poker and all these things where you can play for free online is you just get so much exposure to hands and frequencies and all that stuff just playing free play money. I have an Oculus Quest 2. I think now it's called the Meta Quest. And it's the VR AR headset that Facebook put out for like $300. And man, the virtual poker, like PokerStars licensed their name, and playing virtual poker on there for all play money is really, really a cool experience. That's something that I recommend anybody to do. If you can get your hands on an Oculus Quest 2, like you can, for free, you can go into the PokerStars thing and you can play in one of these games, and it's a really cool experience. And let's see. So it says, read as much as you can, play poker in actual games. No amount of study compares to actual play learning a game. Got it. Preliminaries. So everybody, before you guys start playing, decide together what to play. For example, jackpots with an occasional round of stud. So they're saying decide what the game is. So this sounds like a home game in a group and something like that. Giorgio, I don't want to sound rude, but why didn't you ever finish your dealing course? I did finish my dealing course. So you don't sound rude, and you can totally learn how to deal poker. And I teach, actually, even draw I teach. If you join my channel, so on YouTube, there's a subscribe button, but there's also a join button. And if you join my channel, you can see the different tiers that you can join at, and you can join the full Texas Hold'em course through my channel, or you can join the mixed games, which include Omaha Stud and all that stuff. So if you want, you can actually get the entire course right here on YouTube. Let's see. Types of games to be played. The player should first decide, right? Talked about that. 10 players could readily play 5-card studs. 7-card stud would be impossible, and draw poker would be unwise. That makes sense. So they're not telling you exactly how many they're limited by, which in casinos now we have answers to that. But they're sort of implying it. There is a lot of procedure with 7-card stud, like what happens. There's a lot to know, actually. I wonder what it would be like back then to play 7-card stud 8-handed and have to do a community card for everyone or count the stub. Like, would any of these guys be able to do this? Do you guys even know what I'm talking about? Dealing 7-card stud has some interesting challenges that are very simple when you're familiar with it, but are more complicated otherwise. Let's see. It says, I don't think I have the join button because I'm from Italy. Oh, possibly. Okay. Well, if you'd like, you can go to my website, truepokerdealer.com, and you can join there. So if you just go to truepokerdealer.com, you can get my course there as well. I did see you responded to my message, and I can't wait to see your live on Poker Card Review. Thanks for the response. You're welcome. And thank you for bringing that suggestion up. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I'm going to do. I actually wonder if that is something that would make sense for me to do on YouTube as a YouTube short, maybe. Because some of this stuff doesn't have to be that long. Like, I could just bang it out with a YouTube short and maybe a TikTok. But I got to get myself a setup for that. I am not actually here in front of this poker table right now. This is just an image of the table that I have in Florida at my friend Jerry's. Giorgio, I do want to mention that the version of the course that you can get on truepokerdealer.com is only Hold'em. The mixed games and all that stuff can only be found on YouTube currently. And I've never known that Italy and possibly some other countries are unable to join my channel. Just in case, try using a computer to see if you have the join button under one of my videos, even from Italy. But that is interesting, and I'm actually curious. If you go to the playlist where it says lessons 1 to 38 for Texas Hold'em, I'm curious if you can like click around in there and find the join option. Let's see. So it says laws. It says laws again. A code of poker laws should be adopted and should be final for setting all questions. No poker laws are universally followed, there being many local customs and preferences, but the laws in this book have been prepared to suit the widest possible. Boy, do I know what this is like. It is very difficult getting multiple locations geographically to be on the same page about any rules for poker. That's why I'm so appreciative of the TDA, and the whole industry is the TDA, and to a degree the WSOP, who is essentially a part of the TDA, even though they have their own sets of rules. But interesting. Time limit. Before play begins, the player should set a time limit and stick to it. I wonder what that means. Almost like a tournament? Oh, they do use the term house rules. So they're sorry, I'm going back to laws. I think the term laws is crazy for this, but I give this book mad props for putting all this information together and then turning it into a book in 1950. That just must be pages and pages and pages of handwritten notes that all turn into a book. I can't think of any other way to do that. Like, then it's just put together on a typewriter and then sent out. How does that work with a typewriter back then? If you mess up one key, do you have to like throw the page out? It's interesting. I don't even know how that would work. So then there's a time limit. Violation of this principle may eventually break up the game or turn pleasant situations into unpleasant ones. I think they're saying for the session. So they're saying a cash game back in 1950 is only going to last a certain amount of time. Ethics. Approved poker ethics. Various groups range from the hard-boiled code in which anything short of cheating is permissible to the strict standard that is tradition in such games as bridge. All right, a survey of alternative customs is given on page 33. Let's just go check it out real quick. Poker ethics. So in some games it's considered unethical, at least sharp, to check on a good hand in the hope that someone else will bet and you can raise him. Oh yeah. There used to be this thing where it said check raising is not allowed or is allowed, because just like, you see this type of stuff all the time in poker. People get so mad. Hey, you fooled me. Well, what do you think I'm doing? But now check raising is like a major part of the game. And in some games, it is considered improper even to bet when you know you have the strongest hand, on the grounds that a gentleman will not bet on a sure thing. Man, nowadays in tournaments, you get penalties for that if you're last to act and you have the nuts. Because why else are you at the table other than trying to make money off of the other players? Boy, that would be interesting. Since card playing is a social pastime, a player is best advised to follow the standards of the other players and remain popular. Well, that part still exists. There is a game within the game a lot of the time for poker nowadays. Bluffing. To bluff in poker is to bet on a hand you know or believe. Let's see. Some players believe you should not support your bluff by making remarks you know are untrue. Well, there is the one player per hand rule that we're very strict on nowadays. So we do very much limit what people can say, especially when they're multi-way. J-Boss says you could correct typewriter errors with whiteout. I appreciate that. I didn't have that insight, as you know. That makes sense too. Intentionally breaking the rules. In most circles, it is not considered ethical to announce out of turn that you intend to bet, to raise, to drop, which means fold back then, when actually you have no intention of doing so when your turn comes. That's reasonable. It is safe to make such false announcements because no penalty is provided for them, but regard for the other players should rule them out when they are not in accord with the code of ethics followed in the game you are playing in. In no circle is it considered ethical to break the rules as by passing on a turn unless it is advantageous to you to do so. You can hurt someone else without possibility of helping yourself. Partnerships, splitting pots. Unethical and almost cheating to play in partnership. Almost cheating, it says. And it is improper to split a pot rather than have a showdown. Yes. That was one thing that, when I started flooring, there was still this thing back then. This was 15 years ago, where some players just wanted to chop a pot in order to appease the situation, and we had to be strict and not allow that, even 15 years ago. Betting blind. When a player announces that he is betting or checking blind, that is, without looking at his hand, he does so to avoid the stigma that in some games attached to this trap passes in sandbagging. Ignore the mumbling I just did. Nevertheless, it is considered in nearly all circles unethical for a player to announce that he is betting or checking blind when in fact he has seen his hand. Nowadays, if somebody does that, they just sort of get away with it, unless it's a home game. However, if a player keeps doing things that upset the other players over and over again, a poker room will sometimes take action and ask them to leave. Betting on an obviously beaten hand. If a player in stud poker bets when his opponent in his 4 showing cards can obviously beat any 5-card combination the bettor might have, it is quite proper for any other player in the game to call attention to that fact and for the mistaken bettor to withdraw his bet. Oh, this is for 5-card stud. Interesting. That seems like breaking the 1 player per hand rule. All right, we're going to jump back to where we were on page 9. I think we're on page 9. Oh yeah, page 30. All right, cards. 52 deck. With or without the Joker is a 53rd card. In clubs, it is customary to permit any player to call for new cards if he is willing to pay for them. Boy, that would be interesting. Start making it so that you have to pay the house to change the decks. I sort of like that, honestly. Because then all these like deck changes, like if every single time you wanted a new setup, you had to pay like $3 for it, I feel like the casino would start being okay with it. The video gamer consortium, smashing that like button. Gotta show the support the way I know how. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Man, what do we think of letting any player change decks anytime they want by paying for the deck? That's just an interesting concept. It's sort of like I was talking to a friend of mine, and she was telling me that, she started giving her son $25 a month, and she stopped basically buying stuff for him, started giving him $25 a month, and anytime he's at a store, he can choose to buy something if he wants it, if he actually wants it. And it creates this decision where you have to spend your own money on this thing that you want. And I'm not saying this is the same situation, but she said that her son stopped just asking for stuff and started thinking and like exploring and using his head in order to make decisions about what he actually cared about. Because when mom was just buying him stuff, it was like, yay, it's mom's money, I don't care. But I wonder if players would like throw the house, say $3 to change decks anytime they wanted. Pay the players to $1 per player, I'd be okay. Wait, what do you mean? Pay the players to $1 per player, I'd be okay. Can you explain that? I'm sure it's obvious. This happens sometimes where something's sort of obvious and I just miss it, but I missed it. Let me see. Willing to pay for them. Though poker was once a one-pack game, it is increasingly common to use 2 packs to speed up the game, one pack being shuffled and prepared for the next deal while the other pack is being dealt. Well, we sort of do that now. Pay the player to change the decks, wasting the player's time. So you're saying whenever the house needs to change decks for a procedural purpose, whenever the decks need to be changed for a procedural purpose, you pay the players $1 each, and then anytime they want a setup change or something like that, they pay the house? I mean, that's an interesting, creating that whole transactional thing in both directions. The problem is the house is doing it in order to protect the game and the integrity, which is a necessary part of things. Paying the players to change the decks $1 per player is interesting, but there's some solution in there that's actually not bad. I'm not let me see. No. Oh, paying the other players too. No. I was suggesting that if a player wanted to change decks, pay the house for the decks and pay each player $1 for wasting their time. I was mainly joshing. Yeah, I get that. It's interesting. Hit Girl says, I like that idea. The deck change requests can get out of hand from time to time. They can, yeah. And it's like, it's tough because you don't want to say no every single time. And I am in no way saying that I've thought this through, because there's a lot to think through with a decision like this. I'm not saying I've thought this through and decks should not be paid for, or like players should pay for deck changes anytime they want. I'm just saying it's an interesting thing to think about. Chips. 7 or more players should have a supply. Oh, wow. How did you get chips back then? Right? 7 or more players should have a supply of at least 200 chips, usually 100 whites, 50 reds, and 50 blues. The white is 1 unit, red 5, and blue is 10. So they're not talking about dollars in this case. They're talking about value. Nowadays, it's much more common to have 1s, 5s, and 25s because it's easy. Each player should be issued the same number of chips at the start, say 10 whites, 4 reds, and 2 blues, 50 units in all. Interesting. They designate somebody as the banker. Players should have no private transactions or exchanges among them. A player with a surplus of chips may return them to the banker and receive credit for them, while a player requiring more chips should obtain them only from the banker. So that's no longer allowed. You can't partially cash out in the middle of a game. Although remember, These games are limit games, which is different. So it's like, whoa, but it's not quite as atrocious, right? J Boss, I'm a beginner. What is the point of paying for a new deck? So, as someone who has worked in casinos, I am very familiar with the fact that when a player feels like the luck is not favoring them of the moment, they blame it on the cards over and over again, and then they want to change the cards in order to bring new luck. And so they'll start throwing a hissy, hey, we need to change the decks, and then everybody's got to wait while a supervisor, if they say yes, the supervisor goes and gets brand new cards, and then the dealer has to verify both of the front or the back. Or the dealer change. Yes, they do try to change the dealer also. And then I'll turn into groundskeeper Willie. Ugh, I'm standing right here. Like something like that, you know. Let's see. Betting limits. Different ways of fixing a betting limit. Some limit is conceded to be necessary. Once fixed, the limit should be unalterable throughout the game. Let's see. So no one may be able to bet or raise by more than a stipulated number of chips. For example, 2 or 5 or 10. Usually this varies with the stage of the game. In draw poker, if the limit is 2 before the draw, it is 4 after the draw. In stud poker, yeah, and for those that don't know, in limit poker, let's say limit Texas Hold'em nowadays, there's 4 betting rounds. Before the flop, after the turn, after the river. The first 2 betting rounds are usually a lower amount. The next 2 betting rounds are usually a higher amount. Let's see. J-Boss says, got it, thank you. You're welcome. The Video Gamer Consortium. Pay me $200, I'm out. LOL. Easy fix for getting the dealer to go home. If you tip me, well, there's got to be someone to replace you. But, yeah. You're not allowed to say stuff like that as a dealer, by the way. If you are learning from Truepokerdealer, please learn not to hustle for tips. You can get fired for that. And I know that the Video Gamer Consortium is making a joke, and I am not in any way saying that he is unaware of that. Right now in this setting, it's definitely funny. But then I thought it through. Ooh, somebody might think they can do that on a table. No, you can't do that on a table. Let's see. Oh, they have pot limit back then. They have table stakes. Interesting. So the limit is raising the number of the chips in the pot at the same time. Let me see. They have the pot correct, too. When pot limit is played, there should still be some maximum limit, such as 50 chips. So they're suggesting that when you play pot limit, in addition to playing pot limit, you also have a hard max cap, which is very interesting and is never done, with the exception of, I know Washington State has a legal reason that the government limits the max bet in Washington State, and so that would exist there, but I don't know of anywhere else where that exists. But it's cool that they had pot limit back then. I wonder what they played pot limit in. Like, I'm curious to see if they talk about that. A heart from Video Gamer Consortium. Let's see. Table stakes. This, and especially table stakes with pot limit, has become one of the most popular forms of fixing a limit. The limit for each player is the number of chips he has in front of him. If he has only 10 chips, he may bet no more than 10, and he may call any other player's bet to that extent. They're saying that basically no limit, which is what we call it nowadays, which is table stakes in effect, because in no limit you don't allow a person to bet more than they have. But it's not obvious to people back then in 1950 that no limit is truly limited, right? Because no limit is not no limit. It is limited by your table stakes. So it's interesting that they had to communicate that, otherwise people would be like, what, I wanted to bet more, I have a really good hand, I'm going to take money out of my pocket, blah blah blah. You can't do that, right? It's incredibly obvious to us nowadays, so we call it no limit, but in fact it's always table stakes, which it is still sometimes called table stakes. BB says AZ is $500 spread max bet. Oh, I didn't know it was Arizona too. Colorado was $100 spread for years until last year when no limit passed. Didn't realize that either. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that. The good old days, yes. I'm fascinated right now, by the way, that table stakes is a thing back then. And they talked about, so if you didn't catch it earlier on, they said there's 2 games of poker to learn, draw poker and stud poker. And they're talking about basically what we call no limit betting back, right now, and they're saying has become one of the most popular forms of fixing a limit. It's very interesting. Let's see. No player may withdraw any chips from the table or return them to the banker until he leaves the game. Player may add to a stack, but only between the showdown or the time that he drops in one pot in the beginning of the next deal. Call a site. The custom of table stakes in which a player may call a site, that is, stay in for the showdown, for all the chips he has, produces occasional side pots. Man, trying to learn this without a video would have been hard. I've had a lot of people thank me for my video in my course on side pots and all that stuff. So, for example, A has 40 chips, B 80, C 150, D 200. Okay. A bets 20. Oh my God, they're going to do this. B calls. C raises 50. This bet traps A, requires him to put up all of his chips to call. C puts only 40 chips into the pot. 20 to call. 20 to call, 20 to raise. I feel like back then you would have to like recreate this in order to learn it. The 30 chips that represent the remainder of his raise go into a side pot. Oh, so when he says puts only 40 chips into the pot, we call that the main pot. D calls, putting 40 chips in the main pot and 30 in the side pot. Are they saying that like everybody understands what to do and so they just make the pots themselves? I'm going to put 40 in the middle for you and I'm going to put 10 on the side for everybody that's left. I wonder if that's what they used to do. Yeah, I guess in a home game, how do you figure that out? Everybody's got to understand it pretty well in order to do it. And there's probably, like, if you think about how it goes back then, there's probably one or two table captains that just sort of talk everybody through it, and everyone's like, okay. Or maybe they really understood it. I wonder. Let's see. And so they say now A can stay through to the showdown regardless of the additional bets of other players. And if he has the highest hand, he will win the main pot. So they call it the main pot. B calls, putting 20 chips in the main pot and 30 in the side pot. In the next betting interval, A is not concerned. Well, as we know, that depends what the turn brings, which this must be like 4th Street or 5th Street or something like that for them, because there's no flop, turn, and river back then, in this book anyway. Hold on. B checks and C bets 50, tapping B. I think that means getting to B's maximum. So you'd have to like start with the amounts in order to figure this out. Lucas says, is it different dealing poker in other countries and outside of the U.S., for example, Germany? So I get asked this question sort of. My understanding is it's pretty similar, but there are social differences, and sometimes they make their ways into the rules. But for the most part, like if you learn how to deal poker from me, it will translate pretty well. That's my understanding of it. I haven't ever talked to anybody that works in a casino in Germany. That would actually be a really cool video for me to travel the world, jump into poker rooms and talk to different employees. Perhaps I will do that at some point. Thank you for sort of planting that seed. Let's see. And here it's saying like highest hand among B, C, and D will win the first side pot. I mean, this is all true. This is how side pots work. It's very well explained for text. Fortunately, there's videos now for this stuff. But when a player drops, he loses interest in all side pots. I wonder how many people bought this book back then, got to this section, and were just like, forget it. I can picture like someone really wants to play poker with their friends and just like literally taking the book and just like really trying to figure it out. Rang doodles. Okay. Let's see. Rang doodles. Rangdoodles. In a fixed limit game, it is often agreed that following any very good hand, say a full house or better, there will be a round of jackpots in which everyone antes, even if that is not the custom in the game, or in which everyone antes double, and the limit is doubled for that round. A round means one deal by each player. When it comes around to the deal of the first player, the usual limit and customs of the game are resumed. So that's really interesting. That's basically saying that instead of a player winning 2 times in a row triggering a kill, if you get a certain qualifying hand, it becomes a kill pot. I sort of like that. I've never seen that done in casinos before. But I like the idea of introducing rang doodles into the casino poker, where if somebody gets like 4 of a kind, anytime someone gets 4 of a kind, the limits go up or something like that. That's pretty interesting. Let's see. Gustavo says, "Hey Mark, hope you're doing okay. You hear about the flip card situation in TCH? What's your take on that? Bart Hansen was surprised about the floor decision." Oh yeah, that video. So I watched a little bit of that video. I don't have any insider knowledge. That was I've dealt poker in Texas Card House, Dallas. I think this one was in Austin. I watched that happen. Meaning I watched Bart Hansen's video on it a little bit. What's the real thing I want to say for this? Bart Hansen is a smart guy. He's a very, very good poker player, poker coach, and he's incredibly knowledgeable about poker from the poker playing side. He's just a regular dude when it comes to understanding it from the poker flooring side. In my opinion, though, so the reason I say that is it's like poker players think that they can run a poker room and open a poker room, and it's just not how things are. It's like one specific set of knowledge in order to learn how to play the game, and then you're in the casino all the time learning that specific set of knowledge, and then a lot of people who are smart and have success with it and are around it and see all this stuff think, oh, I could run a poker room. They don't realize how big that knowledge base is. And I do consulting for poker rooms that are opening and stuff. And so I've had these conversations with many, many people over the years. And I've actually decided not to work with people sometimes if they have zero experience, because it's just way too much to teach them. That being said, Bart Hansen is somebody who is talking about stuff that, I mean, his insights aren't that interesting to me when it comes to how to run the poker room and the floor decision side of it. His insights are incredibly interesting to me when it talks about the playing side of it. The reason they're not interesting when he's talking about the floor side of it is because it's like if I were to take any poker supervisor that was relatively good at the job, which I've spent years doing this job, supervisor, shift manager, I would like have a totally different conversation about that circumstance. There's a way to communicate to players. Being a poker supervisor and getting into that circumstance, you have to essentially go back and it's like a logic problem to solve. And it takes a certain type of communication and a certain thoroughness in understanding what happened in order to be able to handle a floor call like that. So I do agree that the floor call was not handled in the best way, but the card flipping thing, I mean, I'll give you my take on the whole thing, having watched it this way. The player who flipped someone else's card, after the hand is over, it should not affect whether or not their hand is killed, anything like that. For those that didn't see it, there was a player that was all in for some large amount of money, $2,500 I think it was, and the pot was probably $1,500 or maybe it was $2,000. I don't remember. I actually don't remember the amount of the pot. And there was a player that only had $1,500 left that was debating a call, and they had gone runner flush with a 9-high flush, and the fact that they were debating a call was absolutely ridiculous to begin with. Like it almost makes me think that the RFID might have had it wrong for what their hand actually was. And I didn't watch the whole thing out, so I didn't see if he in fact had this hand or not, but he basically talked this other guy into a deal, and then he was like barking at the floor with, well, because this other guy ended up flipping his card over, which he like kept touching it, and it's between seats 3 and 4. So seat 3, who's the one who's all in, touches the card for seat 4 and is like flip. He's touching it. If seat 4 didn't want him to flip the card over, he should have stopped. the dealer absolutely should not have allowed that to happen either. You're first of all, you're on a live stream. Like, you know that a player's not allowed to touch another player's cards. That was really annoying that the dealer didn't do anything about that. And I don't know this dealer. He might be a really good dealer, and I do like to positively represent TCH. And being in a live stream under these types of circumstances is very difficult because you have this tendency not to want to be the bad guy, not to want to affect things negatively. Like, there's all these things, so I understand it from that side. But you can't let another player touch a player's cards, in my opinion. And when they're talking about, like, you can see one of mine and I'll see one of yours and all this stuff, that stuff is ridiculous. The dealer should have stepped in there. And then when seat 3 flipped over one of seat 4's cards, and then seat 4 started insisting like a little like tantrum throwing baby that now that he's had one of his cards flipped, he should be able to flip the other person's card. I mean, that was ridiculous. And the fact that that ended up happening where the other player's card got flipped was ridiculous too. That shouldn't have been allowed. But from the supervisor standpoint, it was not satisfying watching the way that the floors handled that. I mean, that's as simple as I can say it. I could do a review of the review video, I suppose. And I'm not saying I'll do that, but as a supervisor, when you come to the table in a circumstance like that, you start asking the question, how did this card get flipped? That player flipped, the dealer or somebody like that will say that player flipped it. Okay, why wasn't this stopped is a question. Like, it would just be an honest question. Why wasn't this stopped? And then they talk about the deal that they were making, and then you say, well, you can't make a deal like that where you agree to flip one of each other's cards. You're not allowed to touch that card. Now, and it's one of those things that once it actually happens and the card gets flipped, I mean, the right way to handle it, honestly, is after the hand, the player who touched and flipped another player's card in that setting gets asked to go home. And to me, that's a very like simple thing. Like, you just can't flip somebody's card. It's just that simple. But whatever. I don't remember the entire situation. I didn't watch the entire video, so maybe I'm speaking out of turn here a bit. But BB says, yeah, that was bad. Not sure what he was thinking when he did that. As far as Bart's opinion, I always take his opinions and diatribes with a grain of salt. Yeah, totally. It's an interesting video though, for sure. Let's see. Let's go back to this. So I want to highlight this again. I think it's really interesting that there's a concept here that can be used in casinos today where we talk about the high hand, the high hand, the high hand. Well, what about if there's a hand over a certain amount, like 4 of a kind or better, triggering some cool next round of hands? So the next hands until the button gets back to the original seat, something happens there. It's an interesting concept. I'd never thought of that before. J-Boss says, agreed, you can't flip someone else's card. It's unsportsmanlike. I mean, here's the problem. If you allow somebody to flip someone else's card, you're basically saying, yeah, we don't like this, but you can do it. And there's a certain line for stuff like that, and that just crosses it. Because if you have a room where you're allowing someone to flip someone else's card, I mean, you're just creating this whole anarchist like way of poker existing where people don't feel protected, where like people are just going to do that. But you also can't kill the person's hand for doing that. In the situation where the player is all in who's done it. They've already put all their chips into the pot. Then they get baited into flipping this guy's card. Well, you can't give somebody the power to trick somebody into getting their own hand killed. So what the solution should be is you kick the player out who flipped the card after the hand without affecting the result of the hand. Let's see. What about the player who flipped the card afterwards? So I don't remember. I didn't watch the rest of it. I think I skipped forward in the video and I noticed that the other player had one card flipped at one point later. And I don't know if the other player just decided to do it or what. I know that he was being a baby about it. Like, there's no denying that. He was saying, he was basically creating this like logic thing that made no sense, where he was saying, okay, I forget the specifics of it, but it was something like, okay, he flipped my card, so either you have to kill his hand or I get to flip his card. And it's like, well, there's a lot of other possible solutions to this too. You can't just make up two that work for you and call that fair. Like, the player in seat 3 was claiming that he never technically even agreed to flip a card, and it seemed like what he said was, if I flip your card, maybe I'll let you flip my card. And he was sort of like bad at English. I think it was not his first language, and there was this whole weirdness there too where he wasn't defending himself. But Gustavo says he flipped it and was allowed to play after. So if the floor is already there and the floor allows him to flip it, that's one thing. If he's doing it on his own and making his own decision, like, that actually could kill his hand in the hand. If nobody's telling him that it's okay, and he reaches over and looks at his opponent's card during the hand when he's still faced with a bet, especially one in this situation, well, that would merit, in my opinion, his hand to be killed, because now he's just giving himself information for the call. But if the floor said he could flip it, that's a totally different thing. If the dealer said he could flip it, if the player said he could flip it, it becomes a lot more gray area-y. And I'm not sure what happened there, so I can't speak to that. But there is definitely an argument to kick both of these players out after this hand because of the insanity. I sort of felt bad for seat 3 a little bit, where he was baited into flipping the card and creating that whole scenario in the first place. But at the same time, I do firmly believe that the player in seat 3 needs to know better. That's not okay. So, I understand that side as well. Let's see. But you might be right. Both players might merit the ejection. I don't know exactly what happened there. It's like when it comes to poker content, I'm sort of curious and I'm sort of not. Meaning, I don't sit there and consume it all, but I'm also aware of what's relevant in the industry, and I sort of pay attention to that. Where do I got this light coming from? I should move forward a little. So let's see. Poverty play, number 5. A maximum limit is put on. This is back to the book from 1950, learning about what it says you can do for betting. Poverty play. A maximum limit is put on the number of chips any player may lose. Each takes out one stack at the start. If he loses that stack, the banker issues him another, not charging him for it. And in many cases, the player can get a third stack free before he drops out of the game. Some limit should be placed on the number of free stacks so the player will have the incentive to play carefully. That's sort of interesting. So it's basically saying, I guess I've got a problem with my lighting here. It's good to know. It's basically saying that, so imagine this in a casino. You go to play a 1-0 limit game. No, it'd have to be a tournament. You go to play a tournament. In the tournament, how would this work? In the tournament, you are allowed to get extra chips, but they keep track of how many extra chips. So if you go bust, you can re-enter, but you're being charged a penalty against that, essentially. So maybe when you get to a certain point in the tournament, you lose those chips. I don't know exactly how that works. I mean, it seems like it's designed for a home game only, and maybe there's a hybrid cash game that you could play where there's a poverty poker. So let's say there's a separate set of cash chips, and everybody at the table agrees to play for $200 max at 1-0 limit, and nobody can lose more than 200, but all the extra chips can come into play, and you just agree that there's a fixed end time to the game, and I don't understand how you determine who gets the extra money though at the end. Like in poverty poker, according to this, it doesn't explain, all right, so this player loses their 200, and then they also lost another 400. But you can't keep track of who that goes to, can you? So how do you figure that out? I don't know how that would work. That's interesting. It says no limit, sky's the limit, and freeze out and other methods appear frequently in the literature of the game and may once have been common. They're still played by a few, but from a practical standpoint, they're obsolete. That's saying no limit, sky's the limit, freeze out is in this context is different than what we're used to. In this context, it's saying there is no limit on the amount you can bet. It's whatever you have in your pockets, even if it's not on the table. It's just completely as much as you have. Like, you can bet your wristwatch, you can bet your hat, you can bet your, well, nobody wants a hat, but you know what I'm saying. Limits on raises. It's not unusual to limit the number of raises by any one player, or raises any one player may make to 3, sometimes 2. So they have a cap back then. General laws of poker. Look at this. Oh, I don't have it properly here. Hold on. Players 2 to 14. That would be crazy to sit down at a 14-player table. In draw poker, 5 to 7 make the best game. No more than 8 should play. In stud poker, any number from 2 to 9 is ideal, but as many as 14 can play. That must be 5-card being more popular. The pack. We already talked about this. Fewer than 5 players may use a 40-card strip deck made by removing the 2s, 3s, and 4s from this 52-card pack, or a 32-card strip deck by removing everything 6s down. So that's actually an old thing, where that sort of made its way into poker recently, short deck poker, and apparently 1950 they had it. Rank of cards. What? In a stripped deck, the ace ranks below the lowest remaining card. So it's still high, but you can make a straight according to this, the way that it was considered back then, using a 40-card pack where there's no 2s, 3s, and 4s, you can make an 8, 7, 6, 5 ace straight right here. That's interesting. The sequence and rake is never continuous, as in queen, king, ace, 2, 3, except when specific house rules permit such a round the corner straight to be counted. Round the corner straights. Interesting. Wild cards. The Joker, the bug. The bug is terminology from Pygow that I'm familiar with. It's the Joker. Although a bug can only be used in certain ways. Right. I'm just agreeing with what I'm seeing. I'm just agreeing with what I'm seeing here is what I meant to say. Deuces wild is popular. One eyes. The king of diamonds and the jack of spades and hearts show only one eye. The other face cards all 2 eyes. These 3 one-eyed cards are often designated as wild cards. Ranks of suits. The suits have no relative rank in poker. For example, a flush in hearts and a flush in clubs tie if their cards are identical. That is true universally in poker. However, for determining high card or something like that, to see who gets the button in hold'em games, there is a rank of the suits. And there is a rank of suits in 7-card stud nowadays as well. That actually makes me wonder, though, if they're saying that they have no relative rank in poker, then how do they determine the bring-in in the stud games that they're talking about? Okay, take their seats as they please. The banker gets first selection. If a player should demand it to be fair, then they deal for seats to see who sits where. In case of ties, the card dealt first out. The card dealt first outranks the other, so that's how they handle ties, not by suit. The traditional rank of suits is reverse alphabetical order of the first letter of the suit. So spades, S, is the highest rank. H, hearts, is second. D, diamonds, is third. C, clubs, is fourth highest rank. Two players may exchange seats before any deal, provided no other player objects. You never see that. like almost never, but it is true. Like if two players wanted to swap seats, we would allow it in a casino. First dealer. Any player shuffles the pack and deals the cards face up one at a time to each player in turn. And the person to whom the first jack falls becomes the dealer for the first deal. After this, the deal passes around to the left in clockwise rotation, each player dealing in turn. The player may not voluntarily forego his turn to deal. It's interesting. So in order to determine the dealer, they just keep going until someone gets a jack. Yeah, I mean, it's. I hope that you guys can understand that's not a fair system, right? Because whoever receives their card first has the higher chance of being the dealer. Let's see. Any player has the right to shuffle the cards the dealer last. Wait, any player has the right to shuffle the cards the dealer last. The dealer should shuffle at least once. Oh, the dealer last. So they're saying, if I want to shuffle the cards and it's your turn to deal, I can shuffle them and then you shuffle them too. As if you're the dealer, you have to shuffle them too. They used to pass the cut to the right. To let the player to the right cut the cards, and he can refuse to do so. If he refuses to cut, no other player may insist upon the cut. I've definitely played in home games where you pass the cut to the right. At least 5 cards must be left in each packet when the cards are cut. That means you have to cut from either 5 from the top or 5 from the bottom. Nowadays they say it's 8. And by they, I don't know who I'm referring to. I guess that's me saying it's 8 cards. If there's any confusion in the cut or if a card is exposed in the process, the pack must be reshuffled and cut again. It's funny to hear that said, because the way that people shuffle in home games is exposing every single card constantly. And so they're saying for the cut though, we care. After the cut, the parts of the pack must be reunited and dealt as a whole. It's such funny terminology, but it's all they had back then. Nobody can ask for the cards to be shuffled after the cut, with a couple exceptions that make sense. Yes, that is the order from left to right of the suits of the cards, highest to lowest, spades highest. Cards are dealt one at a time to each player in clockwise rotation, commencing with the player in the dealer's left. Yep. Ooh, irregularities on page 15 talk about misdeals. Let's jump to that. Misdeals. The following rules govern irregularities that are common to all forms of poker. Special rules governing irregularities that occur only in draw, stud, etc. are covered under the respective rules of those forms of the game. All right. Misdeal, redeal. A distinction is drawn between a misdeal, which is deemed to be the dealer's fault, and a redeal, in which the error necessitating another deal is not necessarily chargeable to the dealer. So people's egos are at stake here. A misdeal loses the deal. Oh. So that if you cause a misdeal, you actually have to pass the deal in these games? Wow. So you lose the button. That would be really funny if it was a player's button in a casino and they cause a misdeal and they just lose their button. It's like, well, you shouldn't have done that. Let's see. A misdeal may be called only by a player who has not intentionally seen any face-down card dealt to him, and only if the pack was not shuffled or was not offered for cutting, provided the dealer has not begun dealing for a second round of cards. Wow, so there's probably sticklers where, you didn't offer the cut, misdeal, and they lose their position. The dealer gives 2 face-up cards to the same player in draw poker or any other form of closed poker, provided the misdeal is immediately called by the player in question. Let's see. Too many cards, but you can put them back if you can get it right for sure. Boy, this is just like begging people to argue. If a card was exposed in cutting. So this is talking about a redeal, which requires a new shuffle and cut, and a new deal by the same dealer. Gotcha. So they're saying if a card was exposed in cutting or the cut left fewer than 5 cards, it's not the dealer's fault. So you just do it again. 2 or more cards are faced in the pack, which we call box cards, and that is in casinos done as well. The pack is imperfect, but if the pack is incorrect, the deal is void and then is discovered at any time before the pot has been taken in. Player is dealing out a turn. Oh, so they're saying if someone picked up to start dealing, but it wasn't their turn. All right, let's go back to where we were. Let's see, object of the game, to win the pot by having the highest ranking poker. This is a book from 1950. Let's see, the pot, all chips. So they talk about stuff like this before, and they didn't mention 5 of a kind, but then they talk about jokers or wild cards, and so I was wondering if they would include this. For those that don't know, 5 of a kind is still considered to be the highest rank in poker, and you may get 5 of a kind only if there is a wild card, and that does beat a royal flush. Yep, straight flush, 4 of a kind, full house, flush. It's possible I'm missing something interesting, but I just don't want to read all that. Ties, if the 2 highest hands are the same, except for suits, they divide the pot. Okay. Some people play that naturals beat wild cards in hands and are otherwise identical, but this says you split it. I mean, you choose what you do, right? Hi, Mark. How many more hands could you get in a typical hour if you had a shuffle machine at TCH? Any pros to not having a shuffler? Well, Shuffle Master claims that you get like 2 more hands an hour, I think it is. And I mean, they're probably right. Like, some of the dealers shuffle pretty quick, but it takes time, right? There is also that calculation is not exact though, because there is a bunch of like fixing the shuffle machine downtime and all this stuff that definitely takes away from it. I think that they're still faster overall, but I do think that's a bit of an exaggeration, because how many times have you seen a dealer waste time trying to like put a deck back in and like it's a red light and you got to deal with that, and you know, they're supposed to be doing that in between hands and all this stuff. So I actually don't think that shufflers get the amount of hands per hour that they claim they do, but I do think that it's still faster overall by far. That said, they can't have them in Texas from what I understand, because in order to get a shuffle machine, the current loophole laws that they use wouldn't permit it, where it says no gaming device is allowed to be a part of it at all. So they consider a shuffle machine a gaming device. And then also Shuffle Master wouldn't actually sell the machines to the room, because they require a vendor's license in the state in order to do business properly, and so they just wouldn't do that. They wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. But the biggest thing that shuffle machines do, in my opinion, are they help protect the integrity of the game. Because while I don't think I've ever seen anybody in Texas or any hand shuffle room personally who manipulates a deck, there is the possibility of a dealer manipulating a deck without a shuffle machine. With a shuffle machine, it is very difficult to do to a large degree because you're not the one actually going through the motions of shuffling a deck. So that definitely is a factor. But it's still incredibly hard to do. But yeah, shuffle machines are great. I really do like them. I think they've gotten better and better for what it's worth. My experience of dealers having to like keep pushing that red button and slowing things down with shuffle machines, I haven't dealt with them myself in maybe 6 years. So it could be better now. Local hands. In some localities, certain poker combinations are recognized that are not included in the official rules. These hands are played only by common agreement of all players. Among the better known are Big Dog, Little Dog, Big Tiger, Little Tiger, Blaze, Dutch Straight or Skip, Skeet, and Kilter. These hands are all defined in the glossary on page 41. Well, guess where we're going? Okay. Alright. Big Dog, special hand. Ace high, 9 low, no pair. Loses to a little cat, big cat, or flush, beats a little dog or a straight. Big Tiger, same as big cat. King high, 8 low, no pair. Loses to a flush, beats any lower hand. Blaze, special hand. 5 face cards. Beats any 2 pair. Loses to 3 of a kind. Okay. Wait, what else was there? I think I see why these aren't in poker anymore. Big Tiger, Little Tiger, Blaze, Dutch Straight, or Skip, Skeet, and Kilter. Dutch Straight, Skip, Skeet, and Kilter. Alright. So we've got Dutch Straight. I feel like I've heard of this one. Same as Skip Straight as a Queen 10, 8, 6, 4. Oh, interesting. I sort of like that, actually. Let's see. We got Kilter. No card as high as a 10, no pair, no 4 flush, or bobtail straight. It beats 3 of a kind, loses to a straight. Originally, the term was applied to a hand so bad it could not be drawn to. Interesting. Where's Skip? Oh, Skeet, special hand. 9, 5, and deuce with 2 other cards lower than 10 and no pair. Some play that the other 2 cards must rank between 9 and 5, and others between 5 and deuce. Beats 3 of a kind, loses to a straight. I mean, there's something here, like a skip straight. Yeah, it says skip straight right here. Queen 10, 8, 6, 4. We could definitely add rankings to poker hands in order to make the game a bit more interesting. Like, there are definitely other things that can become a part of poker in a poker room. Like, you want to change the game up, make it fresh, like add skip straights, right? Boy, that would complicate things. But this is the type of thing that I'm interested in reading this, because there's stuff like this that was done back then that could be a part of the game. Those games would have to be like super clear though. Man, that'd be crazy to open a poker room and just have skip straights be rank better than straights and worse than, well, you'd have to do the math to see how likely everything was, but if you had skip straights that rank better than straights and worse than flushes, that would change a lot. It really would, I think. Joel says, are you required to count down the deck twice per down there at Texas Card House? Yes. They do require that you count the stub 2 times. They follow WSOP practices in a lot of cases, and that is a WSOP thing. So you're supposed to do it within the first however many hands. I forget what the exact number is. I try to do it the first river that I get to, and then you're supposed to do it right before you get tapped out. Let's see. Local hands. That's interesting. Rotation. The turn to bet begins with the assigned first better according to the rules of the game and passes from player to player. To the left, skipping over players who have dropped. Yep. Betting. We sort of already talked about this. Oh. At any given time, a player may fold, discard his hand, which is not... How is that not the same thing? Drop, discard his hand, and forgo any further interest in that pot. So in the West Coast, it's not as true as in the East Coast, but in the West Coast, it's considered improper etiquette to fold on a check. And on the East Coast and in Texas, people don't seem to care that much. It's one of those things. I think of people who get mad at a player who folds in a check, which I understand it does affect things, but it also affects a player's time, right? If you don't want to have to think and be a part of the hand and, you know, have it be your turn and stuff, and you know that you're just folding, I understand allowing that player to fold when it's their turn. And I sort of support it, despite the fact that some of the industry is very against that. But especially in like PLO bomb pots, oh my God, it's incredibly helpful when a player just doesn't care. They don't have any piece of it. Allowing them to fold when it's their turn is wildly helpful. But here they basically say you can anytime you want. But you can't change your mind. You can check. Let's see. Call the bet of the player before. Raise by putting more chips in. Betting interval. Begins when a first player checks or bets. It ends when all bets have been equalized. Player may not raise their own bet or re-raise their own raise. Then they sort of talk about the example, the showdown. I like that they used that terminology back then. Whenever two or more players. By the way, I used an app called Genius Scan. It's a free app. In order to turn this book into a PDF, it was incredibly easy. Shout out to Genius Scan for that. Like, I would not be doing this video without Genius Scan being able to make this so simple. Like just taking pictures of each page one at a time. It's all it took, and then it just puts it in order, and you send a copy of it to yourself. It's so simple. Let's see. All right, the player with the highest ranking poker hand takes the pot. It says when two or more players remain after the final betting interval, each player must show his full hand face up on the table. That's interesting. And if a player accidentally says the wrong hand, it doesn't affect the result of the part. The cards speak for themselves. But if a player discards his hand after another player's announcement, he may not later claim the pot, even if the announcement is proved to have been incorrect. For a hand once discarded may not be reclaimed. So you have to show your hand, and then you can fold it if you want. That would be interesting to have in poker, where everybody has to show every single time. So when you get to the end, it just eliminates the possibility of somebody mucking a winner. Would poker be better or worse if the showdown required everybody to show every single time? Hold on, let me think about this for a second. Genius Scan. I will. Can you see it? Genius Scan. All right, so what if poker required everybody? Well, I mean, the downside obviously is, so the upside is there's never a mistake on the river unless everybody at the table reads it wrong. The downside is you get a bunch of information about every single player's hand. I still don't hate it though. Like socially, you'd never be able to make this change, but in terms of thinking it through, Raven says, "Hey TPD, good to see you," and then worse for sure. Well, I mean, it's interesting because if you like play online poker, you can see every single player's hand in the hand history when it gets to showdown, and that's done to protect the integrity of everything. And the software itself shows the winner every single time. So there's no such thing as a showdown online. You don't actually do anything. It's when you get to the showdown, 100% of the time you win when you have the right hand, and 100% of the time you can go to the hand history and see what everybody else had at the showdown. So the question is, why not just have that be a part of live poker? At the showdown, everybody sees every hand every single time, no exception. I don't hate it. That's the whole point. Cat in a box is not knowing what someone is doing. The essence of the game is mystery and luck. So it is, but at the showdown, you've now said you want to get all the way to the end. But you are also showing when somebody bluffs and stuff. But I mean, I don't like, let's put it this way. I just said socially you'd never be able to make that change because of the perception of how it all works, and people would be outraged and they'd be upset and all this stuff. But, you know, maybe if you opened a poker room and that was a rule in another country, I'd have to say, like, maybe that game would be better, where just everybody tables at the showdown every single time, no exceptions, no mucking. I mean, you have to do it in tournament, right? When people go all in a tournament, there is no choice. You must table that hand every single time. So by allowing people to muck at the showdown in any circumstance, really all that you're doing is giving people the opportunity to conceal their losing hands so that it's harder to know how to play against them, which there's a benefit to. I totally agree with that. And also make mistakes and sort of be conned into making mistakes. In this case, it's saying you table your hand, and then if you pick your cards up and you muck them, then you've lost it. Even if you had the better hand. BB, when I played at Seminole Casino in Immokalee, in all-ins, they made everyone showdown pre-flop. In tournament, that's true. Are you talking about in cash game? That's interesting. Joel says, have you ever been to a room with a jukebox? We play the same music night after night at Palm Beach Kennel Club, and someone suggested it. Not sure my option. Or, not sure my opinion. I've never been to a room where the players can choose the music. I feel like if there were a system that were built, this is just me not thinking it through too much, but if there were a system that was built with appropriate music to choose from, that had a pretty complete list, I think something like that could work pretty well. People really love when their song comes on, so I like that idea. Would that add to the room? I don't know. Would it take away from the room? Maybe. I mean, the same music over and over again is brutal, so I totally agree with that. However, music does affect people and the way that they participate in the room and what's going on around them, and I do wonder if I don't know. I mean, it's a type of thing where, like, if I had the power to do it in a poker room, I'd be like, hey, let me give it a try. Let me see how it goes. But even that, stuff like that is regional, geographic. All that stuff makes a difference and has an impact. Cash Game, BB said, when that happened at Seminole and Immokalee. How long ago was this? That's pretty interesting. I feel like if this were to be more recently, they probably wouldn't have done that. It sounds like something that might have happened a while ago. Let's see. So, but this is the type of thing here that I'm like, this is why it's so interesting to me to read a book like this, because back then I'm realizing that everybody just showed their hand at the showdown. If the showdown if a player who concedes victory to another player may not discard his hand without showing it. It literally says that the right to see every hand at the showdown belongs to all players at the table, including those who have previously dropped. But if a player makes a bet that no one else calls, he takes the pot without showing his hand, and a player who drops at any previous time need not show his hand. There's something about that we might have made a mistake in the direction we took poker, where we stopped doing that. 4 to 5 years ago, the room shut down about that time too. Oh, interesting. The following rules govern, let me see, irregularities. Oh, we talked about this. We already read through a lot of this. Oh, interesting. Oh, we didn't do irregular. I was like, we did this, but we hadn't. Irregularities in betting. Let's see. Player bets out of turn. They must leave in the pot any chips already contributed. Play is resumed at the proper place, and the player in error may make the same bet and meet any raise, or else contribute the amount that he put in and drop. And he may not raise except to the extent of the chips he has already put in. Hold on. Play is resumed at the proper place, and the player in error may make the same bet and meet any raise, or else contribute the amount that he put in and drop. So this is saying that if you bet out a turn back then, according to these rules in 1950, you are required to leave the money in, even if, as they say in the industry today, the action changes, meaning the amount to call changes. So according to this, it doesn't matter, your money's stuck in there, don't bet out a turn. I mean, there's something to be said for that. Passing out a turn. A player who passes out a turn is out of the play for that hand. A penalty may be fixed for this offense. So I think passing in this case means checking. It might mean folding. They haven't used the term pass to mean either of those things yet, so I'm not sure. I think, no, pass means checking out a turn. Interesting. Improper betting. Chips once placed in the pot, even by mistake, may not be taken out again. There are minor exceptions to this rule. When a player is dealt out, receives no hand, they can get their money back. When someone else has opened a pot without openers, and occasionally in case of a misdeal. Looking at discards. No one may look at another player's discards, including the hand of a player who drops or of a player who wins the pot without a showdown. A penalty should be fixed for this offense. Interesting. So we're going to get to page 18 where apparently they talk about penalties. It would be interesting for the house to enforce penalties on people who do things such as flipping someone else's card, like we talked about in that video. BB says, yet another room that succumbed to a lot of machines overtaking its space, like slots. Yeah, totally. That is a common thing in the industry, though. They just make more money in the floor space. I'm going to take a sip out of my Ray Allen The Shot cup. I used to be a Miami Heat season ticket holder back when all this stuff happened. They do things like give out those cups. Let's see. Improper placing of chips. So it's sort of talking about string bets. The way this is phrased leaves some rooms for fighting. Refusing to show. If a player who is in the call refuses to show his hand or part of his hand, he should be subject to a penalty. All right, we're going to find out what these penalties are for cash games. The industry does not have any good way to deal with this, so I'm curious what they did in 1950. Foul hand. I mean, we do have a decent way to deal with it. People end up getting kicked out, but we don't kill hands or anything. Foul hand. Any hand with more or less than the correct number of cards. Blah, blah, blah. Incorrect pack. Expose. Cards exposed by players. There's no penalty when a player exposes his own hand, nor any redress. A player may continue in the play. Nowadays, they only allow that heads up in cash games in some rooms. It's deemed to affect the outcome and violate the one player per hand rule. Dealing the last card. Under no circumstances may the last card be dealt to a player. If because of the large number of players or the type of game played, the dealer finds that all cards but one have been dealt, this card must be placed among the discards. The discards are then shuffled and cut for further dealing. Yep. It's pretty consistent. Optional poker laws. Ooh, I'm excited to get to the penalties section, but let's see. You could say that the cut is obligatory by the player to the right. If too many or too few hands are dealt, the dealer may shift the cards to restore the pack and hands to what they would have been had no irregularity occurred. Okay. I mean, yeah, the dealer is the arbiter arbiter of all disputes in which he is not concerned, but he may be overruled by a majority of 2 or more inactive players or by a majority of all players if more than one has dropped. I mean, with no house, there's got to be some need for stuff like that. Player who holds fewer than 5 cards may play on but cannot make a straight flush or straight flush. The dealer may correct a 4-card hand by dealing in a card from the top of the pack, which is the stub nowadays. I've understood now that the pack means the stub. And a 6-card hand by drawing 1 card from it and discarding it face down. Wait. They may correct a 6-card hand by drawing 1 card from it and discarding it face down. So they're saying that the dealer is allowed to fix a 6-card hand by randomly removing 1 card from it, which that creates opportunities for cheating. In today's poker, that would not be allowed. And keep in mind, this is not Texas Hold'em or Omaha. This is talking about draw games and stud games. In draw poker, an active player may ask for and receive correct information as to the number of cards each player drew at any time before a bet is made in the final betting interval. So dealers in home games back in 1950, keep track of that information. Apparently you need to know it. All right, penalties for irregularities. This is summarized from the book Fortune Poker by George S. Coffin. I wonder when that book came out. Penalties paid in chips are unpopular with many players, and the adoption of these penalties is optional, but they are the best method of assuring orderly procedure in a serious game. The kitty. They have nicknames for these. By unanimous agreement, players may establish a common pool known as a kitty. 1 white chip may be cut from each pot and put in the kitty, and penalties for infringement of laws may be paid to the kitty. When a number of chips in the kitty reaches some agreed maximum, pots are no longer cut and subsequent penalties are paid into the pot. The kitty belongs equally to all players. Interesting. Pass out of turn. 2 chips prior to the last betting interval, 5 chips on the last betting interval. So a player that, this must mean folds out of turn. It has to. So earlier we talked about that. If a player folds out of turn, it might not. I'm not sure what it means still. It could mean check or it could mean fold. I'd have to look back in this book. Well, there's probably a definition below. You know what? We're on page 18. Let's just see how they define pass. Because I think of it as meaning check, but it sort of seems like they might mean something else. Pass, drop. Okay, so pass does mean fold. Pass out or passing out. All right, so let's go back to where we were. Examining another player's discard. 3 chips. Interesting. Failure to show hand after calling the final bet. 10 chips. So back then, if you don't show your cards at the showdown, 10 chips. $10. Wow. Causing a dealer to expose a card by touching the card while it is being dealt. 2 chips. Man, I would love that one to be a part of poker. Because, I mean, players nowadays at the table, they just, leave their hands right in the way. They might as well just have them fully outstretched like this as you're trying to deal when they're sitting in seats 1 or 9, the seats next to the dealer. If you do that, stop. Put your hands on the rail while the dealer's dealing the cards. I've even seen experienced pros do this, and it's just you're slowing everything down. Use your head. So what they're saying is if you do that and it causes a card to incorrectly flip, you have to put, 2 chips into the kitty. Hey, put a couple chips in the kitty. Mixing pack and discards. 5 chips. Mixing pack and discards. Oh, I see. So if you're dealing, or you're somehow able to access this stuff and you're not dealing, and you mix together the stub and the discards, say you thought everything was done, but it's not done. It's all right, we're going to have to just use what's here, but there's a penalty. 5 chips into the kitty. Failure by dealer to announce the number of cards drawn. 2 chips. So in mixed games, the dealer is supposed to announce the number of discards every time. it's interesting how important apparently that was in home games as well. Prematurely exposing one's own cards. No penalty for first or accidental offense. 2 chips each for repeated or intentional offenses. I wonder what would happen if a player who exposes their hand during the game. It's interesting too because they said that was allowed in a different part of this book, but a player who exposes their cards during a hand had to pay a penalty. If a player receives all 5 cards face up in stud poker through the dealer's neglect to deal him a card down on demand, that player may withdraw his chips from the pot and drop out, and the dealer must supply that number of chips up to a limit of 20 chips. So they're saying as a dealer who's playing the game and has an interest as a player as well, they receive a penalty for flipping a card. It is interesting that casinos haven't built in a way for the dealer to play. Like, that's a procedure that probably could be done. Draw poker is played in various forms. There's a long live stream at this point. I'm getting a little tired, not gonna lie. We're on page 19. Let's see, jackpots. Is jacks are better? Progressive jackpots. Oh, if no one opens on the next deal, queens are better. Interesting. I guess that means the ante stays in or something. Jacks or bobtail? 4 cards of the same suit, called a 4 flush. Interesting. Open on anything. Passing out. Each player in turn, beginning at the left of the dealer, must either bet or drop. There is no minimum hand required for opening. Blind and straddle. The player at the left of the dealer is known as the age. He must put up an agreed amount, usually a white chip, as an ante or blind before seeing his card. So they had blinds back then. This is a compulsory bet and never varies in amount. The player to the left of the blind may pass, or he may raise the blind. This raise is known as a straddle and must be double the amount of the blind or 2 chips. So it sounds like the early version of small blind and big blind. In many games, at least one straddle is obligatory. So this is saying the blind is what we call the small blind, and there's an obligatory straddle, which we call the big blind. The advantage of the straddle is to make the next player at the left of the straddler the first to say whether he will stay in the game. If the blind is straddled, the next player at the left may straddle again by doubling the previous straddle, which we would call the first straddle today. And the next player may straddle him again, and so on around the table until the agreed straddle limit has been reached, which nowadays you see sometimes in poker. On some of these live streams, they have like unlimited straddles. It just goes all the way around the table. If any player in this turn refuses to straddle, this prevents any player on his left from a further straddle. And that puts an end to the period. Yep. Interesting. So back then there was one blind. It was a fixed bet amount, and there was sometimes an obligatory straddle, and then eventually that must have changed to small blind, big blind, since it was just commonly 2 different amounts all the time. Wait a minute. All right. A straddle may thus be made only by a player who sits at the left of the blind or a straddler. Okay. After looking at his cards, the player to the left of the blind or to the left of the last straddler, if there has been any, has the first say. If he does not wish to continue in the play, he passes, drops. turns down his hand and withdraws from the game. The privilege moves on to the next player at the left, and so on around the table. The first player who that's obvious. The first player who decides to stay must bet double the amount of the last straddle. Any following players who wish to stay in must equal the amount of the bet. So in order to call, you have to what we call raise, which is interesting. So they had when they used this structure, and it was probably mostly limit, but imagine playing like 2-5 and it's 10 to call every time. That's interesting. It puts the big blind in a different situation as well. I mean, there's lots of PLO games I see like that where it's 1-2 with a $5 bring in. Joel says, is there a modern rule or two that you disagree with or you would change if you could? Let me see. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I actually disagree with, so, I've learned a lot about the TDA, and I respect the hell out of them. And I've also become familiar working in a poker room that follows WSOP rules, which there's a ton of overlap there. One thing that I've sort of concluded is if you're going to run a big blind ante poker tournament, I do personally think that the experience for everybody is incredibly strong and much better when you count the big blind first when a player goes all in for their last chips. So the TDA currently says that the ante goes first, and it creates this weird situation where, let's say that the blinds are 500 and 1,000. If a player's only got 1,000 left, when it's their big blind, they ante the 1,000 first because it's 500, 1,000, and 1,000 ante. They throw the ante in first of that 1,000, and then they have no big blind. And so if they win the pot at showdown, they only get the ante back because it was ante first. The WSOP does it as the big blind is first, and they can win 1,000 from everybody. I think that's way better. I understand, the concept of ante first, ante first, ante first, and that's where it came from. But I think in practice, the big blind being first is way better. It just creates an experience where a player, when they're under the gun, you force them to understand the rule, and you force them to go all in under the gun no matter what they have, instead of just letting them go all in on their big blind, and if they have a bad hand under the gun, folding and then going in. That's one that I would like to see universal, where with a big blind ante game, the ante is not first as it is in the TDA. What's something else in rules that I disagree with? I'm not saying that I disagree with this, but despite what Raventoe said, and some other people definitely think, I sort of like the idea of every single player at the showdown has to show down. I think that protects the integrity, and there's not really a downside to it, in my opinion, other than people seeing what people play with. But I think that's fine. Yeah, maybe I'm not agreeing with that. I don't know. It's just that's what popped into my head. What other rules do I think of? I don't know. It's an interesting question. I'm trying to think through everything. I mean, I like the idea of introducing another rank to poker, like in addition to high card, pair, etc., all the way up to straight flush. But modern rule change, the rules that like I'm familiar with are pretty solid. I feel like I like that nowadays they don't kill hands as much. I like a lot of that stuff. I don't know. I'll think about that one. If I come up with anything, then I'll take a note of it, and then I'll bring it up in the next live stream. Let's see. Blind opening. In this game, after cards have been dealt and whether or not they have been looked at by players, the players and the dealer's left is required to open the pot for a specified amount regardless of the hand that he holds. And so we call that a bring in. The age? What does the age mean? Blind and straddle English style. The age must open blind. The player at his left may straddle. The age. So this is page 20. Let's see if it says the age here. Wait, did that say the ace and I just read it wrong? No, it keeps saying age. The player at the left of the dealer is known as the age. Oh, okay. So it did say that. The age must open blind. The player at his left may straddle blind. If he does so, the player at his left may straddle blind. After the draw, the active player to the left of that last blind better must bet first. Therefore, by straddling a player acquires the best position, whereas if he did not straddle, he would have the worst position, quote, under the guns. That is a very clear metaphor. I like how just adding the little s to the word gun puts perspective into the feeling that people are describing it as. Block system. 25 chips are put in the pot before play starts. These chips consist of a 19-chip ante of the dealer, a 2-chip blind opening by the player at the left of the dealer, and a compulsory raise to 4 chips by the second player on the left of the dealer. The third player then has the first privilege of betting after he's looked at his cards. The limit of any player's raise before the draw consists of 2 chips. $19-chip ante. That makes a pretty big pot with a $2 fixed betting round. I bet if you gave this book to like a lot of poker players and had them read it, they would come up with variations they were excited to try. Because like some of these concepts could be combined with Texas Hold'em. Going to Joel's question, if there's a modern rule change or two that I disagree with, what are the ones that I should be considering right now? If you guys like make me think of them right now, it'll be a lot easier for me to answer that. What are some rules that kind of suck or could be better or something like that? I'm curious because like I'll have opinions if you say what the rules are that you're considering being bad or good. It's talking about discarding, staying pat. It's interesting how long ago this stuff is from. Exposed card. If a card is found faced in the pack, exposed by the dealer in dealing, turned over by the wind in the deal, where are they playing? Or otherwise shown so that it can be identified by name by any player, a player must accept such exposed card. If the wind flips your card over, you must accept it. This is a book from 1950 if you're just joining. Cards can't be shuffled when drawing. Can't take it back once you discard it. The duty of starting. So after the draw has been completed, the final betting interval starts. I think this is talking about a 2 betting round draw game. The duty of starting the bettor falls to the player who opened the pot before the draw. So you just have to remember. So you can't be too drunk. I could totally picture a home game, even with a bunch of dealers, where people are like just really drunk, and if they had this rule, they'd be like, I don't who opened in this hand. I think it was Joe. Like, the opener drops. He must show his opening qualifications and the rest of his hand face down to prove a fair hand of 5 cards. Interesting. So when they say opener, just to remind you guys, sometimes there's a requirement of like jacks or better. So if a player folds, it needs to be shown that it was allowed to be opened. That's what they're saying. An opener who opens falsely forfeits his hand. And any chips he's already bet. And everyone else is still allowed to continue to play. Interesting. I might be too tired to do the rest of this right now. I think I'm going to pick it up here next time. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to ask any final questions right now. It's been 2 hours and I've just been talking the whole time, so it's tough. Joel says, we're now raking $6 per cash game here. I'm gonna pull this off the screen. All right, this is going to be continued next time. So I'm going to start on page 24 next time with stud poker. And that'll be the next live stream that I do. Joel says, we're now raking $6 per cash game pot at $55 and $2 for jackpot. Have you heard of legit rooms raking even higher than that? I have. So, you know, the poker rake does go up and up over time. It is what it is. Playground poker room in Canada, I have heard, and actually I'll look this up right now, I've heard that they take a $9 rake. Playground rake Canada. Let's see what they take. Rake raised. PokerAtlas.com. Rake raised. Wow, we can't believe it. They raised, this is May 21st, 2017. They raised their rake to an already high rake. Well, it doesn't say what, but my understanding is that at Playground they take $9 for the rake. I mean, if you play on a cruise ship, they're probably going to be taking 15 for a cap, 10% rake. I've played in an underground game in Dallas where they took 10% up to $25. But in casinos, you'd never be able to get away with that much. But $9 is the most that I've ever heard in a legit poker room, and I could be wrong. But 6 and 2 is relatively standard nowadays. And it sounds like you take it at the 5. So 1 at 5, 1 at 15, 1 at 25, 1 at 35, 1 at 45, and the last one at 55, which sounds standard. I've seen it done in the 6s a lot as well. It's tough. Like, if you're a poker room that's out in the middle of nowhere and there's no competition, you can probably get away with more, meaning a higher rake as more. If you're a poker room that like has a bunch of competition, it's going to be tougher for you to charge more than the competition. But I will say this. In general, the rake, even though it seems like everybody cares about it a lot, many poker players don't pay any attention to it at all. So some rooms will sometimes adjust the rake, and the only ones that stop going there are the sharks. And then when they realize that the fish are still there, they start going back, and then they just complain about it while they're there, but they still go and play. It's really not a calculation that a lot of poker players take into effect. I will take that doesn't mean it has no impact, but it's just something I noticed. I will take any other comments that you guys want or questions, and then I'm going to jump off because reading this book and chatting with everybody has been really fun, and I feel beat. I'm going to have to drop, as this book says. Hit Girl, we don't rake under $10, $1 for every 10, max $5 plus $1 for bad beat, so 6 total. Yeah, that's actually on the low side. I would even recommend Hit Girl that you go up to either 5 and 2 or 6 and 2, unless your players would freak out. But nowadays, I think 6 is relatively widely accepted, but 5 in some areas might be the most that people will accept. I do think 2 is incredibly common nowadays as well. If you're taking a jackpot, you might as well take $2. There are some rooms that do 4 and 3. They enjoy having more promotion money than rake. But appreciate you guys. J-Bus says, very cool stream. Thank you. Ibby says VOR red. Let's see what that means. VOR meaning. Oh, very high frequency omnidirectional range. Well, thank you. Wait, no, that's different. That might have been a typo. I'm not sure what VOR red means, but appreciate you jumping in the comments. Well, yeah, so thank you guys very much. Appreciate you guys being here. Good spending time with you. And I'll see you guys in the future.